Hey everybody, Average Picker here. So this video is not going to be about picking. This is going to be a little bit of a COVID rant and a little bit of here's something to think about and a little bit of a funny story. Somehow all tied together to sort of semi-relate to each other. Yeah, stay tuned. We'll start right now. This part's not so much of a rant as it is informative. Gloves. I unfortunately do not have any gloves with me. I've run out, or I would do a demonstration for this. But if you're out there and you're wearing gloves, there's a couple things you really need to do. One, think about how gloves are used in a hospital, right? They're used for a task and then they're disposed of. I mean, that's the way they're meant to be used. You're not really meant to use them all throughout the day or take them on and reuse them and, try to fold those suckers back out and blow in them and get your hands back in them. That's not really the way they're designed. And there is a right and wrong way to take gloves off. And so what I end up doing, I usually employ the pinch technique. So you pinch one of the gloves and kind of pull it up, get your hand taken out of it. You crumple that glove up in your hand. Then I flip over. I use two fingers and I slide in that way. And then you can kind of peel the glove off inside out, and because you're holding that other glove, it ends up inside it, and it's all in a nice little contained bag. And a really fun way you can kind of test this, and kids love it. Get something, a bucket of water will work. It's a little more fun if you make it goopy, especially for kids. So like cornstarch, add some food coloring to it. If you're like me and you have an old thing of motor oil laying in the backyard, you could use that. But put your gloves on, dip your hands into whatever it is you're using, and then try to get your gloves off without touching any of that goop and having any of that on you when you're done. And if you can do that, you're well on your way to proper glove usage. There's a lot of videos out there though online about how to take gloves off and on, and pictures and stuff like that. So look it up. It is really good because your gloves are only as good as when you're taking them off, kind of, I mean, if you're touching them like crazy, you're just gonna get all of that on you and it's not gonna make a difference. Still wash your hands. Masks, and I mean, this to me tells me how muddled the information out there has gotten. I don't even know if masks are that effective or not. And I think I've been keeping up with this stuff pretty well. And I know in my head, if I'm getting confused and uncertain, that means there's just a lot of conflicting information going on out there. My personal feeling on masks is it's not going to hurt anything. If you've got one, go for it, wear it. If it makes you feel better, it's certainly not hurting anything. So, and it's not making anything worse. So if it makes you feel better or helps make someone else, feel a little less anxious, you might as well just wear it, right? COVID and car accident deaths. So here in the US, I don't know, we're 24,000 some deaths now. And I think the number that gets toted with the car accident thing is around 33 to 35,000. So we're kind of approaching the car accident death stuff. And it's a terrible, terrible comparison. The two are not the same. But if we're as a society willing to say, hey, 33,000 deaths is the cutoff point for us, right? So we're willing to tolerate anything up to that, but not anything over that. A viral infection, by the time you hit 33,000 deaths, you're going to be at 1 million. It's not something you can just, pardon the pun with cars, apply the brakes to and stop. And part of that is because car accidents are not contagious, right? They're not contagious. Now, I am willing to entertain this comparison if somebody can show me a case where somebody called into work and said, hey, you know what? I'm sorry, I can't come in. I saw a car accident and I think I'm coming down with a car accident, and I don't want to give anyone else at work a car accident. So I'm going to stay at home, and I think in a few days I'll probably be better and I won't have a car accident. show me that case and I'll start to entertain the comparison, And also, we don't accept 33,000 deaths anyway, right? I mean, we work continuously to make cars safer. So it's not like we just accept it, that that's what happens. And, a lot of car deaths, they're caused by someone's stupidity. They're not paying attention, excessive speeding. I know that's a point of little contention. Does speeding cause accidents? Blah, blah, whatever. Drunk driving under the influence of something. There's a lot of factors into car accidents. And, a lot of them could be eliminated with just some responsibility, So, yeah. Car accidents aren't contagious. Can't really make the comparison. Okay, so let's get into the flu for a second. I'm going to try to keep it brief because you could do a whole other video on the differences between this and the flu. That's almost a whole topic on itself. But let's get into an imaginary world where they're a little bit more similar. The flu is consistent and the flu is predictable. And consistent and predictability is always better than uncertainty. My motorcycle has a few quirks, but they're predictable and they're consistent. So they don't bother me. When something new comes up, then I start thinking, well, now we've got a real problem. And you probably do this all the time in your real life. You may have a complete and total asshole that lives down the street from you. But I will bet that if they walk down the street, and they're kind of looking around and checking things out, you pay them a lot less attention than you do the stranger that's walking down your street, or the group of strangers that's walking down the street checking everything out, right? I mean, how many times have you gone to your window and gone, who's that? Not sure who that is going down our street. It draws more attention, right? And rightfully so, because you don't know. And especially if that person ends up to be stabbing every 1,000th person or something. Okay, or just randomly, let's 1 out of 10 here, 1 out of 1,000 here, or 1 in 100 here. That's not predictable and consistent, right? So the enemy we know is a different enemy than the enemy we don't know. And so, there's a lot of differences about how it behaves in surfaces and transferring and what it does and all kinds of stuff. But we respond. We know the flu, like I said, it's predictable, and we respond a certain way to the flu. We know we understand when the symptoms are coming on for the flu, and hopefully we make call in sick to work or something a little more quickly, things like that. Like I said, I'm going to try to keep that really short, but it's because it's not the same, whole different thing. But even if it was close, it's something we don't know and we don't have really good treatments for, and we're still trying to understand. And that makes it a lot more threatening than this thing that we kind of go, well, we sort of know how to deal with this, right? So, all right. Trying to get a little more comfortable here, but I'm cleaning up, so things are a little weird. My chair's kind of crammed in here. What are we talking about? COVID, yeah. So all this quarantining and social distancing stuff, you can kind of think about it as digging fire breaks. A fire break is not meant to put out a forest fire. It's just meant to kind of prevent the spread of it. And distancing people lessens population density, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But the other thing about it is we adjust really quickly, all right, to things, and we also get complacent to them very quickly. And you really have to kind of think of this as an endurance race, right? This is not like a one-day sprint or something. And the longer something goes on, especially when there's no signs outside of there being anything too wrong other than a lot of stuff being closed, things like that. You're not seeing physical damage. It's hard to keep that in mind, and it's hard to keep going with it. And it becomes easier and easier to get a little complacent and a little sloppy to it. Anybody out there, I know a lot of us have worked in like machine shops and just, even in Locksport, we use drills and all kinds of things like that. When you're going to get hurt is very highly in that point where you're just way too comfortable working with something and you get a little sloppy. You just screw up, you just make a mistake. And that's what happens in cases like this. You're in it for the long haul, sort of, but the long haul doesn't it seems a little longer than it is, and you're just kind of, and you start getting a little lazy about things. So, especially now where we're at, you know, April, mid-April or whatever, you know, it's a little easy, I think, to start slacking off at this point, but you've got to keep in mind, this is an endurance thing. You know, you've got to stay vigilant with it. You can't start slacking off and getting sloppy. But that brings us to my other one, the R naught. I call it the RO. I've always called it the RO number, I think, because it's got that little subscript 0. But I think technically it's R naught or R aught number, about infectivity and stuff. And that kind of ties into modeling, because there's been a lot of criticism. Oh, the modeling is wrong. You know, the model, you've said this and now it's actually this, blah, 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 blah. So the R number, though, is really cool. And it takes a lot of different things into factors, but it's basically what is the chances kind of an individual person infecting anybody else. And one of the things it takes into account is, I'm doing a thing on COVID, I'm sitting here, oh, my eye itches. One of the things it takes into account, though, is population density, right? So you may have a general overall, you know, R number for any one particular virus or something, but you can start to break it down and see variations of it across different regions, just depending on population density. So here where I live, it's going to be a different number than someone up in South Dakota, right? Because it's a little more densely populated here. And that is part of what the point is and you can see this in the spread too, especially if you look at Africa and stuff. You know, Egypt, South Africa, there's a place over on the west side. But major ports of entry, it's much denser, you know, and then it pushes inward. Because, you know, who is flying in to the DRC directly? You know, not a big tourist attraction thing there. So you're going to get a slower spread. Just like in the U.S., you know, in the more rural areas, like I said, you know, you're going to get a slower spread. But I think that's kind of neat how it takes into that account. And that's what all this social distancing is about, right? If you stay home more, and if you stay away from people more, it's like a virtual limiting of the population density, right? So your population density is the same, but if you don't come in contact with each other, it kind of virtually creates a less dense population. And that'll change the number, right? That number can develop. You know, you may still have your basic one, your general one, but that number in your area can change based off that. I forget what, it's got to get down to 1.055, I think is the magic number, is where it has to get to, which is a little frightening in itself. That's pretty low. But yeah, so that's kind of neat. Now, and that's one of the things people start saying, oh, the modeling's wrong, the modeling's wrong. Well, the original models were also based on just what was happening at the time, right? I mean, your model's going to change, and your model's going to change based off how, you know, as we learn more about COVID, that's going to change the model. As we learn more about how it survives on surfaces and how it's spread, that's going to change the model. And as we change our behavior, that too is going to change the model. Right, so it's sort of like if you were out on a quarter-mile track and you're walking, for easy math, we'll say you're walking 1 mile an hour, right? And so you come around after your first quarter mile and I say, okay, you're going to be able to do a mile in an hour. And you go, okay. And you walk again and you get partway around and then you start running. And you start running as fast as you can and you come in, you know, and your 1 mile time is now 37 minutes, let's say. You walked some, but you also ran a lot. And then you go, see, your model was wrong. Your model was wrong. You said it was going to take me an hour to do a mile. It took me 37 minutes. You know, well, you changed your behavior, right? So, of course, my prediction in my modeling based off of 1 mile an hour equaling 1 mile to the hour is going to be wrong. You know, you can't fault the model because things started changing. That's why we don't just do one model. It's a continuum, right? I mean, we're continuously, I say we like I'm part of it. Models are continuously run, right? It's not something they just run once and they go, that's it, we're going to go with it. So I'm going to try my best here not to get political with this. But there's a lot of stuff about the supplies and the supply chains, and are places receiving the supplies or are places receiving not. And it's interesting because in a way, this is just kind of this old management issue. And all of us that have ever worked anywhere have probably seen this before. The higher up you get in management, kind of the more efficient the numbers are that you're getting, right? Does that make sense? In other words, as somebody at the very top of a large organization or company, they're getting some really raw numbers up there, or they're not even raw numbers, are they? I wouldn't raw might imply something too much. They're getting a more simplified version. And so for them, they may be able to look at something and say, oh, wait a minute, we used to make 30,000 widgets and now we're only making 15,000 widgets, What's going on? And that's the problem, right? If they just react without knowing what's going on the floor level, they might not realize all their machines are breaking, right? They might just think, oh, I've got lazy employees, I'll just fire them all and we'll hire new people, or something like it, right? So that flow of all those details that make up the data that you get at the top gets a little more skewed. This is where my little funny story is going to start to come into play. So yeah, I've said I still feel like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing in this thing, and I think the communication system is a mess. But you start to see things like where they're questioning, well, why does this person need so many? Why does this hospital need so many ventilators? Okay, so I don't really know what a ventilator is for. I sort of, because of all this COVID stuff, have started to figure it out. I wouldn't know in what cases, though. Before COVID, I wouldn't know in what cases you would need this ventilator specifically or not. And I'm not saying I'm just as smart or any smarter, but I suspect, there's some of that going on, right? So, if a hospital's telling me they need 30,000 ventilators, and I go, well, I just sent you 15,000. What could you possibly need another 30,000 for? You must be stealing them, or they must not. Okay, so something's going on there, though, then, right? So either, if I was at the top of this, I'd be going, okay, so either they're not arriving, or there's something about these ventilators that I don't know, right? I mean, maybe they're disposable. Maybe you can only use them for an hour. I'm not saying any of this stuff applies to ventilators. I'm just saying there's a lot of questions you need to start at the top asking yourself before just jumping to conclusions, because there's probably something going on the ground floor that has that expertise that you don't know and you aren't aware of. And so instead of now is not the time to get petty insults, and start just declaring bizarre things without any evidence on it. You need to kind of figure out, well, what are these? How are they used? Why is this case different than other cases where not as many is needed, right? And I think we can all kind of relate to that, because we've all probably been in a job where we've had management, and the management has come down on us for some reason. And the problem is the management doesn't understand the operations on the ground floor, right? There's something in that they're missing, because all they're seeing is some number, and they don't get those details and those nuances that, a lot of us that may be on the ground floor working on something is aware of, right? So I think we could all kind of relate to that, that example anyway, or at least probably a large portion of us. So I think it's a good one. But here, I'll tell you a little funny story that has to do with that. So I had recently moved to this area, and I'd gotten a job. It was a tech job. So I got a job. I was basically with a company that was contracted out through IBM. So we were essentially IBM employees. We just didn't get a lot of the IBM benefits or pay or things like that. But we still had to go through a lot of the same checks and everything as IBM. And so I had been working this job about a week and a half, right? I had gone through the interview. I had been hired. I'd been there a week and a half on the floor doing my job. And manager came up to me and told me he was letting me go. I was fired. I couldn't figure out why, right? And I kept asking him why, and He said, "That's what we were told. You'll need to contact HR." So I said, "Okay, well, let me go see the HR department." He said, "No, this is, HR up in New York City, right?" And this is where that you can see this information flow disconnect come from. I'm like, New York. Okay, whatever. So I went home for the day. Well, I talked to him and I said, "We get all this worked out, I can come back, right?" And he said, "If he gets the okay from New York, then sure." So I went home and I got on the phone and I started making calls and worked my way up through a lot of confusing departments. So it turns out that week and a half that I had worked there was a little bit of a delay on my paperwork generally going through and the background checks and everything going through. And up in New York, where they were processing them, discovered that I was currently incarcerated in South Carolina. Whole different state, that I was currently incarcerated in South Carolina. So somehow I was in a prison in South Carolina, but going to work every single day for a week and a half, right? I mean, it's a hard one to wrap your head around. How could somebody think about that? Unless you think about how that information can kind of flow and you start going, yeah, okay, so all this person had, somebody just had an application and all their job is to run background checks. And they ran the background check. It came up and said I was incarcerated. That was automatically flagged as a no. They told whoever, they were supposed to tell, this name is a no. That person called down to the main office and said, this person's a no. And that person came and told me, right? And yeah, I was left flabbergasted. And it was really odd because I'm talking to the person who can make the decision on the phone. And I'm like, dude, I'm on the phone with you. Like, you can see where I'm calling from. You can see the number. Like, what part of this phone call do you think is showing I'm currently incarcerated? And so I actually had to prove that it was not me in a prison in South Carolina before I went back to the job, which I did manage to do. And it turned out it was a typo error somewhere in the system. Somebody crossed a couple numbers on my Social Security or something, and it messed everything up. But I find that just so odd and funny at the same time, that. But yeah, I think that taught me more about information flow and the problems with just having a spreadsheet of data and things like that, and not having an understanding of where those numbers were coming from, and what's being done and how that's being generated. I think that taught me more about that whole process and the disconnect that management can have than probably anything I've ever read. Just going through that one experience where, even though you're on the phone with somebody, you still have to then get off the phone and generate whatever report it is they want in order to prove it, there's a harsh lesson in there in management. And, not just in management, but in knowing, you need to know about what you're doing, right? And where the stuff is coming from, because if you don't know, it's going to be all over the place, isn't it? It becomes real easy to start pointing fingers, real easy. But yeah, so I'm not saying don't trust the data. I'm just saying when data issues arise, sometimes you need to start looking down and saying, what could be causing this, right? Okay, so the big but though is, right, to be able to see through that and to manage that well and to understand what you're looking at and getting all that information up in there that then makes all of this relate and make sense. You have to be willing and able to admit you don't know everything, that there's some things you just don't know about. And that's, let's face it, that's a little bit of an issue right now, right? I mean, especially when somebody is a pretty much a self-proclaimed expert on nearly every single topic. So, yeah, I'm not going to get political about it, though. Yeah. So that's why it's important to try to figure out what stuff is, right? But anyway, I think this video ran a lot longer than I intended it to. Thought it was only going to be a few minutes long. Everybody, yeah, stay safe, stay vigilant. Remember, you're in it for an endurance test, right? And I hope you all are doing okay. So have a good one.